Top of the morning to you, and the rest of the day for myself. Here on Betamax Blogger, we've talked about Easter movies, Christmas movies, New Year's movies, and what better way to celebrate St. Patrick's Day than with a few classic films about Ireland. Starting with perhaps one of the most famous from 1952, John Ford directed John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara in The Quiet Man. When American fighter John Wayne returns to Ireland, see his heritage, and falls in love with Maureen O'Hara's feisty redhead and has to contend with her brother, played by Victor McLaglen. More on him in a little bit. An absolute classic, one of John Ford's finest films. Indeed, he won Best Director for it. One of my favorite John Wayne movies, and perhaps my favorite Maureen O'Hara film. Her brothers appear in it, I know. John Ford's brother Francis appears in it. A lot of good stuff, some very funny parts, and perhaps mostly remembered for the big epic fist fight at the end of the film. Absolute classic and a must-see. Speaking of John Ford, you might remember if you watched my Best Pictures of the 1930s videos, we talked a lot about Mutiny on the Bounty, and the film that Mutiny on the Bounty competed with the most for Oscars back in 1935 was John Ford's The Informer. The Informer taking Best Director and Best Actor, Mutiny on the Bounty getting Best Picture, and so on. But The Informer tells the story of Victor McLaglen's Gypo, who sells out one of his friends to the British in exchange for passage money to the US, which he then squanders in a night of drunken carousing, and also realizes that his former IRA companions know that there is an informer amongst them and seek out to find and kill him, and he knows that he can only stay ahead of them for so long. Very dramatic film, based on the novel by Liam O'Flaherty, which I've read the novel before, and it's not great. It has some really good parts, but I wasn't a fan of it on the whole. But I really like the movie. It does a nice job there. And Victor McLaglen, even though that's, I think, a very poor representation of him on the box, but he does a really good job, and definitely deserved that Best Actor Oscar, I'd say. Playing a very tricky part. You know, he's loyal to his friends and to Ireland, but at the same time, he's willing to sell them out for his own interest. A lot of fascinating stuff, and kind of sets the trend, I think, for a lot of films about the IRA and unrest in Ireland. Speaking of which, one from a decade later, and one that doesn't get mentioned too often, 1947's Odd Man Out, featuring James Mason as an IRA-affiliated criminal who goes on the run when he's mortally wounded in a botched robbery and meets all kinds of crazy characters. Robert Newton's Bizarro Artist is probably best remembered. This is from Criterion, of course, as you can see. They do a very nice transfer. Not as good as The Informer. It lags a little in places, but the ending is really good too. I like that they gave some of the female characters much bigger parts than they had in The Informer, and that makes for, I think, a really good movie. Maybe not a household name, but it's also neat to see kind of a UK perspective on the Troubles and IRA difficulties, and I certainly recommend seeing Odd Man Out. And James Mason, he's good in anything from Captain Nemo and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to Five Fingers to North by Northwest, all kinds of stuff. So, good one to check out. Well, I mentioned James Mason as Captain Nemo. Here's another Disney classic, and one that I'm sure many people will watch today for St. Patrick's. Darby O'Gill and the Little People. Today best remembered for featuring Sean Connery. Indeed, this was apparently the film that inspired the producers of the Eon James Bond series to cast him as Dr. No, or in Dr. No, I should say, not as Dr. No, that was Joseph Wiseman. But here in Darby O'Gill and the Little People, we have the story of a leprechaun. You can see him on the box there, and an old fella who's out to catch him. It has lots of Disney magic, and it also has creepy banshees in it. But I think it's perhaps best remembered for Sean Connery singing, "Have you ever seen?" that kind of thing. And though he sings a little bit in Dr. No, he sings a lot more in this one. It's a fun family movie. I wouldn't say it was Disney's best live-action work, but yeah, it's worth seeing, I'd say. Speaking of musicals that people will watch for St. Patrick's, we'll talk about Fred Astaire's final musical, not his final film, but his last one where he sang and danced, Finians Rainbow, which teamed him up with Petula Clark and Sir Tommy Steele and Keenan Wynn. The story of a magical pot of gold being taken from Ireland to the American South, and the havoc that ensues there. Francis Ford Coppola directed. This is before he did The Godfather and whatnot, so pretty interesting there. It's a little long at 2.5 hours, I'd say. Yeah, about 2.5 hours. A little long. I do like the songs in it, though, especially Look to the Rainbow, which is kind of like the main theme. And Fred Astaire gets some good singing and dancing in, even though he was about 70 or so at the time this movie was made. He's still really light on his feet, and he's a lot of fun. Tommy Steele, best remembered as a rock and roll star back in the 50s in England, is out of control as the Leprechaun character. He's kind of fun, but I can also see where he might get on your nerves after a while. And Keenan Wynn plays the racist senator, and in a very bizarre twist is turned black by a wish based on the magical pot of gold. And so he does a bulk of the movie in blackface, and I can see how that might be a major, shall we say, liability for some people. Admittedly, it's being done to teach a lesson about racism, so I guess it's not as bad as it could be, but still certainly a very awkward watch. But a fun one, if mostly just for the music. And then I decided to throw this one in, Going My Way. So we have Bing Crosby and Barry Fitzgerald as a pair of Irish Catholic priests there, trying to keep their church open and so on, trying to help the wayward youth. Going My Way is kind of more of a Christmas film, so we'll probably talk about it maybe this Christmas. It's also a Best Picture winner for 1944, so when I eventually get to Best Picture winners of the 40s, we'll talk more about it then. I'm not a huge fan of Going My Way, but it does have a certain charm to it. Bing Crosby's good in anything, as is Barry Fitzgerald. And the songs are fun. Swinging on a Star, of course, the most remembered. And that's a really fun kind of novelty song. But they do a nice rendition of Tula Rula Rula, and they get some kind of Irish vibes. So if you watch this for St. Patrick's Day, I think that would work okay. And lastly, my better half asked me if I'd throw this one in. So a much more recent film, The Irishman. There you go. We got Al Pacino as Jimmy Hoffa. Really good stuff there, I'd say. It's a long film, because Martin Scorsese, and he wants to tell this epic story about Jimmy Hoffa and all these other characters there. But we have good performances by Joe Pesci as Buffalino, of course Robert De Niro in the lead, and it has a good kind of period feel to it overall. I really like the way that it actually, feels very authentic. And I'd say it was probably pretty historically accurate too. I haven't watched it in a while. I'm thinking about due to watch it again. But if you want to look at, I guess, some of the larger-than-life figures of Irish-American crime, that would be a good choice for you. And that will do it for today, my friends. So go out there and enjoy a Guinness, and we'll see you next time when I review the Beach Boys 1965 live in Chicago. Have a good day.